Have you ever wondered why in the most luxurious palaces of Europe and Russia, where gold blinds the eyes and architecture defies gravity, architects forgot one tiny detail? We have been lied to our entire lives about the grandeur of the Age of Enlightenment, but one only needs to scratch the gilding a little, and an inconvenient, reeking truth emerges. You have been deceived. All the history textbooks you read in school, all these enthusiastic tours of the Hermitage and Versailles. This is a screen behind which hides a fact so absurd that the brain refuses to perceive it. But I will ask you one question that will destroy your worldview. How could a civilization capable of building the most complex hydraulic structures, fountains gushing tens of meters upwards without electric pumps, and palaces weighing millions of tons, forget to build toilets? Stop for a second and imagine. The 17th or 18th century. You are in Versailles. No. The Sun King Louis XIV walks through the Hall of Mirrors. Around are silks, velvet, wigs, powdered faces. But the smell. Historians shamefully lower their eyes and mumble something about different customs. They tell us that European nobility simply did not like to wash. But this is a lie, designed to hide a technological gap. Official history feeds us tales that aristocrats relieved themselves right behind thick curtains, in corridors or into portable chamber pots, the contents of which they spilled out the windows. We are told that the greatest architects of that time, who calculated the load of domes and designed the acoustics of enormous halls, simply did not think to lay a ceramic pipe for waste disposal. Do you seriously believe this nonsense? Look at Peterhof. Look at Versailles. This is a hymn to hydraulic engineering. This is a complex system of communicating vessels, storage reservoirs, sluices, and cascades. Water is supplied for tens of kilometers, under enormous pressure, to create a spectacle of jets soaring into the sky. Engineers of that time, according to the official version, possessed knowledge allowing them to control the element of water with jeweler's precision. They knew the laws of hydraulics better than modern graduates of technical universities. And you want to tell me that these same people, these geniuses of engineering, could not figure out how to make a simple slope in the floor and lead a pipe to a cesspit outside the palace? This is impossible. This contradicts any logic of technological development. If you can build the Samson fountain, tearing the lion's jaws, from which a 20-meter column of water gushes forth, then sewage systems are a kindergarten-level task for you. Here lies a terrible secret that museum curators keep silent about. What if they didn't build these palaces? What if those we call great monarchs and emperors were simply settlers? Imagine a group of savages who found an abandoned modern skyscraper. They go inside, see elevators, but don't know how they work, and use them as storage rooms. They see toilets but don't understand their purpose, and start defecating in the corridors because the drainage system is disconnected or broken, and they don't know how to fix it. This is exactly what we observe in the history of the 18th and 19th centuries. We see the primitive use of high-tech objects inherited from a previous, much more advanced civilization. We are used to calling this a cargo cult, when natives build airplanes out of straw, hoping that the gods will send them food. But our ancestors, or those presented to us as ancestors, acted more cunningly. They settled into stone masterpieces, cleaned them of dirt and silt, but could not restore their functionality. Palaces without toilets are not a design error. This is evidence that the original purpose of these premises was entirely different. Perhaps what we consider ballrooms were technical floors or power stations, and those very vases we see in museums were not used for flowers at all. Recall the Winter Palace, 1,057 rooms, 1,786 doors, 1,945 windows, and not a single, do you hear, not a single designed room for hygiene in the original plan that historians show us. How can this be? The imperial family, owning half the world, forced to use chamber pots like peasants in hovels. We are told that sewage systems appeared in St. Petersburg only in the second half of the 19th century. But at the same time, granite embankments, perfectly fitted blocks, polygonal masonry, and those very fountains already existed. This is a technological oxymoron. Either you have stone processing and hydraulic technologies, and then you have sewage, plumbing, and heating. Or you live in dirt and filth, but then you build mud huts out of clay and straw, not St. Isaac's Cathedral with columns weighing 114 tons. There is no third option. Historians try to sit on two chairs, telling us about the empire's grandeur and its savagery simultaneously. But the truth is, we are simply parasitizing on the ruins of giants. Think about the word culture. It implies cultivation, development. And what was happening in the palaces of Europe was degradation. The scent of perfume, invented by the French, was not for seduction, but to mask the nauseating smell of unwashed bodies and excrement that permeated the velvet drapes. Kings bathed twice in their lives, at birth and before marriage. And this is presented to us as normal? No, this is the behavior of people who lost access to water. In palaces where fountains consume thousands of cubic meters of water per hour just for beauty, people have nowhere to wash. Do you feel this dissonance? Water is available for show, for demonstrating power, but it's not available for basic needs. This means only one thing. The fountain system operated autonomously, perpetually, and the new masters of life simply couldn't redirect this flow into bathrooms because they were afraid of breaking what was not built by them. They arrived at ready-made buildings. They saw pipes disappearing into walls but didn't know where they led. They saw openings that we might now mistake for ventilation or technical shafts and bricked them up because there was a draft. They blocked unique air heating systems with fireplaces because they didn't know how to operate them. We live in a world where history was rewritten by the victors, but these victors were barbarians who conquered Rome. Only this Rome was planetary in scale. And the next time you look at the luxurious facade of a palace, remember, behind this facade lies the secret of people who went to the toilet behind a curtain because they forgot how to use the legacy of the gods. But this is just the beginning. If you think the absence of toilets is the strangest thing, wait until we examine how these fountains actually worked and why there are buried floors under every palace that you are forbidden to know about. Ready to discover what the basements of the Hermitage hide? Let's delve into technical details that would make any sane engineer's hair stand on end. Official science claims that the Peterhof fountain system is a marvel of 18th century hydraulic engineering created solely by the force of gravity. We are told that water was taken from the Ropshire Heights and flowed by gravity through canals and pipes to create the pressure capable of raising Samson's jet 21 meters. It sounds beautiful until you start calculating. To ensure the smooth operation of such a complex, more than just ditches dug by serfs with shovels are needed. Perfect slope calculation to the millimeter per kilometer is required. One mistake, and the water will either stagnate or burst the pipes in the lowlands. And here we encounter the first impossible artifact, the quality of the pipes. During the restoration of old systems, fragments of pipelines are often found, the casting quality of which surpasses many modern counterparts. These are pipes perfectly smooth inside, often with connections we would today call flanged, but made with technologies lost for centuries. How, tell me, could a civilization that cannot establish the production of earthenware toilets and sewage drains in an imperial palace cast kilometers of high-strength cast iron pipes capable of withstanding colossal pressure? This is like finding a Ferrari engine in a horse-drawn cart. The contrast between the technology for supplying water to fountains and the complete lack of technology for waste removal from living quarters is not just a strangeness. It is proof that the fountains and palaces were not built by the same people who later lived in them. Now shift your gaze from the fountains to the buildings themselves. Look at the lower floors of the Winter Palace, Mikhailovsky Castle, Or any old building in the center of Moscow, St. Petersburg, Paris, or Rome, what do you see? Windows sticking out from under the asphalt. Half the window looks out onto the street, half underground. Historians call this the cultural layer. We are told that over 200 or 300 years, people tracked in so much dirt, and street cleaners did such a poor job that the ground level rose by 3 or even 5 meters. Think about this absurdity. 3 meters of dirt? That's the height of a single-story house. If the official version is to be believed, our ancestors lived in a pigsty where garbage was not removed for centuries, but simply compacted, and new roads were built over the old ones. But as soon as excavations begin, this theory crumbles into dust. When archaeologists or builders excavate the foundations of old buildings, they discover that these so-called basements have full-fledged windows, doors, and even grand entrances that now lead into solid earth. Who in their right mind would design a window underground? Who would create beautiful brickwork, arches, and decorative elements where no one would see them because they are covered with soil? The answer is obvious. These floors were the first. They were above ground. The buildings were taller. A catastrophe occurred, a global cataclysm that buried cities under several meters of clay and soil. Researchers call this phenomenon a clay flood or clay infill, and this is precisely what explains the oddities with sanitation. Imagine you have a high-tech house, but the first 2 floors, where the technical nodes, purification, and sewage systems were located, ended up buried under a thick layer of earth. You are survivors or incoming settlers. You occupy the upper floors that survived. You don't have the technology to excavate the city. You simply level the ground to the 3rd floor, turn windows into doors, and start living. But the toilets remained down there under meters of clay. They are inaccessible. The pipes are broken or clogged with soil. What's left for you to do? Use chamber pots and pour slop out the window, directly onto that cultural layer, which is actually evidence of a planetary catastrophe. Look at old engravings and paintings by ruin artists, such as Piranesi or Hubert Robert. We are told these are artists' fantasies. But why are these fantasies so photographically accurate? In them, we see majestic but ruined and overgrown buildings, arches covered with earth, and tiny people scurrying among giant ruins, using them for their daily needs. These people cook stew over a fire in the middle of a huge temple, drying laundry on the remnants of ancient columns. This is us. We are a civilization that came to the ashes. Another fact that troubles researchers is heating. Look at the Hermitage or Versailles. Huge windows, ceilings 5 to 6 meters high, and small decorative fireplaces. Have you tried heating a hanger with a candle? In the harsh Russian winter, when it's 30 below zero outside, these fireplaces are simply a mockery. Even if you stoked them around the clock, burning groves of wood, the heat would rise to the ceiling, and downstairs would be an icy hell. Official history tells us that Tsars wore fur coats inside the palace. But why build a palace in a northern latitude with insulation like a summer gazebo in Italy? It's suicide. Unless these buildings were designed for a different climate, or for different heating technologies. There is a theory that air ducts for atmospheric electricity, or another form of free energy, were laid in the walls of these palaces, which heated the walls from the inside. The fireplaces we see now are crude additions made by settlers who didn't understand how to turn on the main climate control system. They punched through chimneys where there were none, ruining the original engineering, simply to avoid freezing to death. We see the same picture all over the world. Giant doors, designed for people nearly 3 meters tall, steps that are uncomfortable for an average height person to walk on, mirrors hanging so high that it's impossible to look into them without a stepladder. All of this indicates that the palaces were not built for us. We are Lilliputians in a land of Gullivers who have occupied someone else's homes. We admire the stucco but cannot replicate the composition of the mortar that holds for centuries. We look at the granite columns of St. Isaac's Cathedral and cannot explain how they were cut, because we don't have tools of such hardness even today. Official construction documents often look like retrospective fakes. Budgets don't add up. Construction timelines are unrealistically compressed. We are told that St. Isaac's Cathedral was built in 40 years, but if you calculate the number of granite blocks and the time to process them by hand, as history claims, it would have taken thousands of years. Either they had computer numerical control machines, or they didn't build anything, but only restored. And here we come to the most terrifying question. If there was a catastrophe, if cities were buried under clay and technologies were lost, then where did all the people go? Where did the builders of these wonders go? Why do paintings from the mid-19th century show empty cities? No crowds of people, no market hustle. Deserted St. Petersburg, deserted Paris. Rare, solitary figures wander through ghost streets. This is not an artistic device. It is a documentary record of emptiness after a purge. We are approaching the topic of a demographic collapse that cannot be explained by plagues or wars. The numbers given to us by official sources do not align with the amount of living space. Cities were designed for millions, but thousands lived in them. Who cleared the territory before our appearance? And most importantly, why was our memory of this event erased by inventing a fairy tale about slow development from a splint to Ilyach's light bulb? Let's face the truth, using a language that cannot be faked, the language of mathematics and statistics. If you open any graphs of Earth's population growth, you will see something strange that official science cannot clearly explain. We are shown an almost straight line for millennia, where the planet's population barely fluctuates, and then, suddenly, in the mid-19th century, there is a vertical takeoff. We are convinced that this is the result of improved medicine and the Industrial Revolution. But look at photographs from those years, the first daguerreotypes from the 1840s. Paris, St. Petersburg, Moscow, Rome. What unites these images? Total, ringing emptiness. We are told about the long exposure times of early cameras, due to which moving people supposedly disappeared from frames. This is the most ridiculous lie aimed at schoolchildren. If the exposure was so long, why are the shadows from trees and buildings sharp and not blurred? Why is the water in rivers still and not turned into mist? Why are flags hanging and not blurred by the wind? And most importantly, where are the carriages? Where are the horses? Where are the market stalls that stand for hours in one place? The cities stand fully built, with magnificent architecture, with paved roads, but they are empty. These are ghost cities. These are sets awaiting actors. And here we come to the most shocking fact, which historians try to obscure with the term urbanization. In the 19th century, millions of orphans suddenly appeared all over the world. Think about this. Huge orphanages in Moscow and St. Petersburg, overcrowded shelters in London and Paris. In the United States of America, so-called orphan trains were launched, carrying tens of thousands of children from the East Coast to the Wild West, distributing them to farmers as free labor. Where did these legions of parentless children come from? Where are their fathers and mothers? Did they all simultaneously die from some selective disease that spared the children? There is a terrifying theory that we are a civilization of orphans. We are the descendants of those who were artificially settled into cities emptied after a catastrophe. We were raised in the incubators of orphanages, given new surnames, Ivanovs, Petrovs, Smiths, Johnsons, given a simple, linear history, and sent to inhabit the ruins of a great civilization. That is why we do not know our roots deeper than our great-grandparents. Ask yourself, who among you can name your great-great-grandfather and where he is buried? For 90% of people, ancestral memory breaks off precisely in the mid-19th century. Beyond that is darkness. Let's return to construction. Let's calculate the logistics of building St. Petersburg. We are told that the city was built on a swamp, where stone was brought by carts. To build St. Isaac's Cathedral alone, hundreds of thousands of tons of granite and marble needed to be transported. Without railways, without heavy machinery, only by horses and barges, they punched through flues where there were none, spoiling the original engineering just to avoid freezing to death. We see the same picture all over the world. Giant doors, designed for people almost 3 meters tall, steps that are uncomfortable for an average height person to walk on, mirrors hanging so high that it's impossible to look into them without a stepladder. All of this indicates that the palaces were not built for us. We are Lilliputians in a land of Gullivers who have occupied someone else's homes. We admire the stucco, but cannot replicate the composition of the mortar that lasts for centuries. We look at the granite columns of St. Isaac's Cathedral and cannot explain how they were carved, because we don't have tools of such hardness even today. Official construction documents often look like retrospective fakes. Budgets don't add up. Construction timelines are unrealistically compressed. We are told that St. Isaac's Cathedral was built in 40 years. But if you calculate the number of granite blocks and the time to process them by hand, as history claims, it would have taken thousands of years. Either they had numerically controlled machines, or they didn't build anything, but only restored. And here the puzzle of the toilets comes together into a chilling picture. The previous civilization, which built these giants, might have been physiologically different from us. Remember the legends of people who ate manna from heaven or prana. Remember the absence of kitchens in old palace layouts. Was food carried from outbuildings across the street? Seriously? In freezing weather? Or perhaps the very concept of eating and digestion was different. If they were beings of a different order, perhaps they didn't need sanitation in our understanding. They could have used technologies for matter decomposition, waste teleportation, or simply had a zero-waste biological cycle. We, the settlers, possess primitive biology. We eat, we digest, we excrete. And when we were placed in these stone halls, we faced a problem. Living here was luxurious, but there was nowhere to relieve ourselves. We started punching holes in the floors, attaching wooden outhouses in backyards, and routing pipes directly into canals that were originally intended for clean water. We turned the Venetian canals and the rivers of St. Petersburg into sewers because we didn't understand their true purpose. We are barbarians who use a microscope to hammer nails. Pay attention to the doors, the giant doors of the Hermitage, whose handles are at the level of a modern person's face. Huge steps that one has to climb, not walk. Ceiling heights that make a person feel like an insect. This is architecture for giants. And in many old books, one can find mentions of people of enormous stature who lived quite recently. But then there was a war of gods, a war of titans, call it what you will. Traces of this war are everywhere, perfectly round lakes, resembling craters from nuclear explosions, melted fortresses, the so-called star forts, scattered across the entire planet. By the way, about star forts. We are told they are defensive structures for cannons, but look at their geometry from above. These are complex fractal antennas. These are circuit board diagrams, laid out in stone and earth. The water surrounding these stars served as a conductor or resonator. It was a unified planetary energy network that provided free energy, heat, and light. And the palaces were part of this network. The domes of cathedrals are not just for beauty, they are capacitors. The crosses on them are antennas. The metal ties within the walls are wiring. When the system malfunctioned or was deliberately shut down, civilization perished. A nuclear winter or that very year without a summer, recorded in 1816, ensued. The survivors degenerated. And then came new masters, puppeteers, who purged the remnants, removed the technologies, and settled the empty cities with us, people with short memories and primitive needs. They handed us shovels and said, You built this. Be proud. And we are proud, not noticing that we live in a graveyard of gods, using their temples as public toilets. But the most terrifying thing is not even that. The most terrifying thing is that the process of substitution has not ended. We see history being rewritten right now before our eyes. But we have evidence in stone. It's impossible to fake millions of tons of granite. It's impossible to fake polygonal masonry in Kronstadt or Peru. The stones cry out that we are strangers here. Now that we understand that the architecture does not match our physiological needs and the population has been replaced, the question arises, where did the knowledge go? Why do we not find blueprints for these amazing systems of pump-free water supply and etheric heating? The answer is simple and terrifying. They were burned. Fire is the most effective eraser in the hands of history falsifiers. Remember with what frightening regularity cities burned down in the 19th century. The Moscow Fire of 1812, the Great Fire of Chicago, San Francisco, Boston. We are told, wooden buildings, a dropped candle, an accident. But cities built of stone and brick burned to ashes as if they were doused with napalm from the heavens. Stone does not burn, but in photographs from those years, we see granite blocks crumbling into sand. This was a purge. Not just homes were destroyed, evidence was destroyed. Libraries and archives burned with particular thoroughness. This has been happening for centuries and continues to this day. The Library of Alexandria, the Library of Congress in the USA, the Indian Library in Moscow. Each time someone gets too close to unraveling the real chronology or finds technical documentation of the gods, a short circuit or accidental arson occurs. Census books, blueprints, maps of the old world burn. We are left only with rewritten textbooks that tell us illiterate peasants with chisels built masterpieces that we cannot replicate today with lasers and cranes. But the most cynical spectacle is the so-called World's Fairs of the 19th and early 20th centuries. Paris, Chicago, St. Louis. The official version states that for these exhibitions, giant ancient cities with domes, colonnades, artificial canals, and electrical illumination were built in just 1 or 2 years. And after the exhibition closed, all of it was demolished because the buildings were supposedly made of staff, a mixture of plaster and straw. Do you believe this? Look at the photographs of these temporary pavilions. These are monumental structures, surpassing the Capitol or St. Peter's Basilica in quality and complexity. The terrible truth is that these cities were not built specifically for the exhibitions. They were unearthed. These were preserved quarters of an ancient civilization. They were restored, shown to an astonished public as achievements of the industrial era or architectural fantasies, and then mercilessly blown up and razed to the ground under the pretext of the event's end. Why? Because these complexes were too perfect. They revealed a level of technology that could not be explained by a steam engine. There were moving sidewalks, wireless electricity, complex acoustics. It could not be left. The elites who seized power after the catastrophe needed to erase the memory of the Golden Age, turning it into a fairground attraction and then destroying it physically. They feared that people would start asking questions. If we built this out of plaster in a year, why are we living in dirty brick boxes? So the palaces were blown up, the debris was dumped into reservoirs, creating new embankments, and history was rewritten. We have been convinced that we are moving along the path of progress, from a splint to an LED. But looking at these destroyed masterpieces and palaces without toilets, it becomes clear we are moving down a spiral of degradation. We were given smartphones to distract us, but deprived of free energy and longevity technologies. We were given central sewage, which we are so proud of, but deprived of eternal architecture and harmony with nature. We live on ashes that we ourselves helped create with our silence and blind faith in official lies. We are a generation with amnesia, wandering among ruins that we mistakenly consider our achievements.